And now our keynote, Jeremy Sinclair.
Hello, everyone. I am Jeremy Sinclair, and this is my first keynote. I'm a little nervous, but we're going to do this. And today I want to talk about how every experience is an opportunity to learn. Okay, so about me, I live in the city of Wheeling in West Virginia, really small city. A lot of people might not even know it exists. I am currently a web engineering specialist 3 at Oric, which is a law firm, not the vacuum cleaner place. What I primarily do is .NET development, a lot of ASP.NET Core, SharePoint, .NET Framework, a lot of Azure DevOps. I just do a wide range of things. I'm also a Windows Insider MVP. It's probably one of my greatest accomplishments because I've been talking about trying to get into the MVP program for years and finally made it happen. I call myself the self-proclaimed Windows on ARM evangelist. You could find me on Twitter speaking about Service Pro X and porting applications to run on Windows on ARM. And I'm also an avid anime fan. I love anime. I know a lot of people might find that weird, but I don't care because it makes me happy. So, we're going to talk about in this keynote. Mainly, I made it focused around my experiences, but I want to talk about how I became a developer and everything I do to stay motivated. Okay, so everything started at a young age with a 386 computer. My father, he worked at a steel mill called Blawnox, and I was just fascinated by just looking up to my dad for everything. I remember he had this old 386 computer, and one of my first memories of a computer was, I believe it was a Prodigy, so the internet access. So I grew up with DOS, and with a kid, you see lots of cool things like computer games. So that's where I got introduced to technology. And as with anyone who's had experience with DOS and computer games back in the early 90s, you had to go through a lot to get the video games to run, especially setting up the sound card to make the sound work. That was one of my biggest pet peeves of just playing computer games in general, because nothing really ran consistently for me. But troubleshooting the issues that really carried forward in my career. This is where it all started. And another thing I want to talk about is how I actually gained more exposure to the internet. So, Mosaic Browser. Back in around, I believe it was 1995. This ties in with my father again. His teacher, she had his teacher at the college he attended she had this little group that they called CompuKids, and it was meant to be a place where kids can be exposed to computers and technology. And it was really my first exposure to using Windows. So Windows 3.1 was the first operating system I used. I didn't really like it. I was used to DOS and command line because I wanted to play my video games. But when I became exposed to this Mosaic browser and saw the opportunity for just simply being able to search within a search engine for, at that time, there wasn't a lot to really search about, but just to enter a query into a search box, press enter, and be presented with content across the internet. That was, really big for me. Because right there, I saw that, the sky's the limit. What else can come from this exposure? Now, how did I start on the developer path from that early exposure? And I will say the web browser comes into place. Not specifically that web browser. JavaScript. JavaScript was my first exposure to programming. So this was around, let's say 1997, 98. I was in 4th grade, I'm young. I remember randomly searching on my dad's computer, and I came across a website, and it was a website where you could enter in a number into an input box, and it would guess it. So I think it gave you a few parameters like add 10 to this, subtract this, and I bet I can guess your number. And 9 times out of 10, it did. And I was so fascinated by that I wanted to have the opportunity to create my own. That's where my thoughts just started going haywire. And so I started to look at the source code. And at that time, I knew absolutely nothing. But I started at least trying to read it and tried to modify it, because I wanted to understand how that worked. So I'm going to fast forward here. Remember how I said I was an avid anime fan? Anime comes into this picture also. Dragon Ball Z. So as a kid, in the late 90s, a lot of us were exposed to Cartoon Network in the US, and Dragon Ball Z was a very popular anime. I was obsessed with it. I felt like I was one of the characters that could fight on through any battle and level up, and I got inspired by it. So, and due to that inspiration, I would search on the internet for information, because we were only, in the United States, they were years behind the episodes that played in Japan. So I would search for different things, stream videos that I couldn't understand without subtitles. But most of all, I became really, really intrigued by how the websites worked. And really, it was something as simple as seeing how a query string in the location bar could change the content of the page. So with that, I went searching because I wanted to make my own. So this is my first exposure to classic ASP by means of front page. Now, front page, I have a lot of interesting history with this program, and it actually plays into a lot of my current role because I'm also a SharePoint developer. So it's always fun to see a lot of what I was exposed to from classic ASP and using like the front page, server side includes and extensions, seeing how all of that played into my future. So I remember I built this simple website. It may have been on GeoCities or one of those other free websites where it actually supported classic ASP. At that time, the information was information on the internet for learning how to do anything with programming was very scarce. You had to buy books, and they were absolutely expensive. But there were a few resources. And so I was able to create my first classic ASP website that happened to be a Dragon Ball Z website. Now, moving forward, this was really how I started seeing what I could do with applications also. Visual Basic was the first IDE that I used for creating applications. And the funny thing about my use of Visual Basic is I created applications just out of sheer boredom. I wanted to tinker around with the IDE. I wanted to tinker around with what I could actually do on the system. And at sometimes I did some not so cool things with it, like doing something with AOL Instant Messenger and passwords. Yeah, I learned early on that programming could be either good or bad depending on how you use it. Speaking of programming languages, I've been exposed to a lot of them. And here's actually a lot of, this is what I went through. I first learned JavaScript, as I explained. VB script and ASP, I put them together. Visual Basic. I learned PHP in high school because of a friend of my father's. He was an inspiration to me because earlier on, around let's say 8th grade, he saw that I was really intrigued by computers and I liked troubleshooting and breaking things. So he gave me a simple task to help him with being a webmaster. Yes, webmaster. I used to help him basically manage domains. So it was like a pseudo domain registrar at like 8th grade. And the really awesome thing about that is by the time I hit high school, I had earned enough money to buy my first Xbox. So I began to see I can make something with technology. I can make money with it. I can make a career with this. And back to the PHP part, he started building custom websites, and he told me one day, he bought me this book. He was like, learn this, because we're going to create some databases. We're going to do some dynamic programming. And so I took that on. And I started to fall in love with the idea of I can build anything I want, even on the web. I see these big websites that have these shopping carts. They're selling things, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so I took every single bit of knowledge and inspiration from everyone I saw, and I did something with it. Now, C++, you would think I would kind of learn that first before PHP, but I learned that in college. I actually tried to learn it before, but for some reason it didn't click with me. But when I learned it in college, because I knew PHP, it made the syntax to me was fairly simple, because PHP has a C-like syntax. And with C++ and even C, I started to dive into learning how to parse data. That seemed to be a lot of what I really like to do. Python, that was another thing I learned in college. And the really awesome thing about Python was I really liked it. It felt like it was different for me, but it was something that I picked up, and that really kind of led me down the path of, oh, there's a such thing as, more dynamic languages and more, functional languages. And one of the best things I did with Python for my class project is we were given an assignment to create our own, interpreted language using some syntax that our teacher defined for us. And me being the trial error, let's see if this works. I found the easiest way to make it happen by assuming that there was a way that we can evaluate functions and variables as like in a string format. So I found a very efficient way to make this interpreted language work, while many people struggled. PowerShell. This is where I jump into my first job. Well, my first, job at the place I'm at now. I was an intern, and this was around 2007. As an intern, I was a technology architecture intern. This was a kind of mixture between systems engineer, applications engineer, and web engineer, all of it put together. I learned PowerShell because I liked scripting and automating things. That was another thing that I was really, really excited about, was being able to just say, I don't want to do this over and over again. Why can't I just create something to do it for me? So one of the best things I've done with PowerShell was automate moving Exchange mailboxes between 2003, 2007, 2010. it took a long time for me to figure that out. And one thing I could say is, as an intern, I did right by asking for help and not trying to take it all on myself. And PowerShell to this day is one of my favorite things to use. A lot of the time I switch between determining whether I need to create a full application or just, if I can do it in PowerShell, I'll do it in PowerShell. Actionscript, I learned this as a part of an independent study in college. Adobe, it was Adobe Flex at the time, it was called. I learned and used that to help create a card game for teaching students in the communications course in that major of the concepts that go into communications. It was very interesting because I picked up a lot of the language because of previous experience with JavaScript. And there I found out that they both incorporate ECMA script. So that previous knowledge of the first language I used helped me forward with a project that I just chose this technology because it looked like it was something that could work for me. And now on to my all-time favorite language, aka my default one, is C#. Let's see. Now for C#, I learned this purely out of inconvenience. And a lot of what I've done throughout my personal and professional career, it all stems from inconvenience. So, in 2010, Microsoft released the Windows Phone. I fell in love with this device. I still love this device, and I have at least 8 Windows Phones that are just in their own little shrine. I remember at this time, I asked our IT director to buy this phone for me because I wanted it to develop for. Well, I recall one day, late 2010, I was mowing the yard. At the time, Google had this Google Music service. And the phones, there was no native application for Windows Phone. And naturally, there was one for Android. But I didn't want to buy an Android phone just to listen to the music. I wanted to listen to it on my phone as it was. Well, I remember mowing the yard one day and the music kept cutting out because the screen locked. So I had 2 choices. One, let the screen run without locking and just drain my battery to nothingness. Or I stop the lawnmower and unlock the screen, it just suffer. Well, I got extremely irritated. And then I said, you know what? I'm just going to go and create my own app. And mind you, at the time, I didn't really know much of anything about C#, other than some minor homebrew applications that I built while I was an extremely active member of XDA developers. So the application I created, it was called Cloud Music. I built it to try to mimic the aesthetic of the built-in music app for Windows Phone. I spent a lot of time scraping the data using Fiddler, which is one of my favorite tools, seeing how the process for logging into the Google Music service, receiving the tokens, how each data call to retrieve the playlist, the library, how do you search for a song, how do you play a song. I spent a lot of time just going through everything that I could see and troubleshooting. And as I learned and discovered more, I put everything to use. This was also during that time, if any of the C#.NET developers remember, to do anything asynchronous with web requests, it was extremely painful to do, and the code was extremely tedious. At that time, I believe I might have actually been exposed to the async CTP because of David Fowler. I saw this async CTP. I picked it up. I launched it into my project, and I went to town on refactoring my code, learning techniques. And for an application that started out simply being something built because of inconvenience mowing the yard, for myself, I decided to distribute it on XDA developers first, and then I put it into the Windows Phone store. The whole process behind this just helped me learn and grow that I have the power to do anything I put my mind to. So how do I stay motivated with everything going on? Like, as you've seen, there's a lot of random things that go into how I became a developer and how I'm able to take everything that I learned and put it all together. I say the most important thing to do with being a developer and continuous learning is to take care of your mental health. And personally, I only found out back in 2013 that I have ADHD, which now makes a lot of sense for me because I've had trouble with paying attention. My motivation was hit or miss, but I was supplementing Red Bull, so I had no idea. But over the years, I've learned that to really be successful and bring things to bring your full self out, you have to know when to hang up the gloves. There's like one of the previous slides say, inconvenience brings that that inspiration and leads to that innovation. But there are times where you have to just stop whenever you hit a big roadblock. And I still struggle with this. And to take time away from work. If you're starting to feel burned out with researching and trying to develop, take time away, put the computer down, put the phone down, and just relax. And the most important point is to reach out to professionals if you're feeling off. And that's what I did. I remember I posted a status on Facebook, and I was just like, I don't feel good. And I had a few of my developer friends reach out and say, hey, you need to speak with a professional and see what's going on because we have ADHD. Take care of yourself. And that's what I did. And that was one of the best decisions I could ever do. Another thing to do is to find communities. I'm primarily on Twitter, and you'd be amazed at the sheer amount of things that I'm exposed to. And I can say a lot of the opportunities that I've gained have been purely because of Twitter. Most of the time, I follow specific topics for things that I like in terms of like programming and various operating systems. And there's a lot of people out there that you can learn from, and everyone's willing to help. But that's one of the first things to do is to find a community to get involved with. Like Reddit has programming communities, Stack Overflow for help, and even local meetup groups. Also, give back to those who've helped you. And this is, I want to say, primarily towards, if something is open source and you discover an issue, instead of just fixing it in your own code and being done with it, contribute. My first commit into GitHub was for this library by Corrado. And I remember running into an issue with the event to command for using his library. And I discovered a fix for it. And I had fixed it in my code, but then I thought, you know what? Because I found this fix, why don't I give back and help others out? And so that was like the first thing that I ever did. And I felt great about it because if someone else ran into that issue, I just saved them a lot of time. Now, this is the one thing that I'm really proud of. And this is my first contribution to the .NET runtime. I had this mindset last year during Hacktoberfest, and I said, I'm going to contribute to the .NET runtime. I'd looked at it for years, and upon first look, I just did not know what I was doing. I didn't think I could ever contribute to this, but I took that step, and I even asked for help. Like, I wanted to do something to, get myself out of that box. And keep your curiosity flowing. So as developers, we're usually curious about something. Like, how did we become developers? How does this one thing work? How can I make something like something else work? Interesting example about keeping the curiosity flowing is back in 2017, my wife, she bought me an Ancestry DNA kit. And she heard me talking about it, and she knew that I wanted to discover more about, potential family that I knew nothing about. And as soon as I got the kit and signed up for it, I became hooked. There was a lot of information I had to dig through, a lot of the DNA matches, and it took me forever. And I'm like, I am a developer. Why don't I just find a way to scrape through this code and parse it out, make something where I could at least automate a bit of this information, and then I can have a way to verify quickly. And that's what I did. I created a console app where I could look through my matches, look at the different generations, and find the common surnames. Now, was it perfect? Absolutely not. But I did, cut out a lot of, misconceptions in these matches, and I was able to actually connect and verify a lot of family members. So it was really cool. And have fun with what you're doing. Like, you're allowed to have fun. I know that there's a common misconception that because you're developing, even at work or on your own time, that it has to be head down and typing and just like a robot. Now, you have fun what you're doing. A fun example of that is a challenge that Donna Sarkar gave me. She told me that she wanted to see me do something with Power Apps in the Power Platform. So I had this weird, awkward idea that I was going to use Power Apps and Azure Functions and the Magic.NET library to create a little simple application where it takes a picture, sends the data to an Azure function, runs it through the Magic library, the image magic, runs this liquid rescale plugin that can do all kinds of weird things to images if you make it distorted. And then I returned a weird distorted image of myself. And I did this all in about, I'll say, 4 or 5 hours. I was off of work that week, and so I went to a Starbucks and I just said, you know what? Let's do something fun. And I just did this solely to say, look, I just pulled this off. This was fun. There was no, nothing, there's no need for it, but I could say, hey, I did this and I had fun with it. Another thing to do is speak it into existence. I know there's many times you want to do something and you're thinking, I'm not good enough. I can never do that. Oh, they're more experienced than I am. I'm not that level. Now, speak that in. Write it down. If you have that little inkling of that thirst for it, make it happen. And an example of this was I wanted to be a Microsoft MVP for years because I looked up to a lot of the people who were there and who were distributing all this great content. I saw them as a challenge. I saw them as, okay, this is where I need to be. I need to do this. Well, and I did it. And I was just looking at this a few days ago, and just the fact that I was actually speaking to a technical account manager we had at work about hey, the Windows Insider program would be cool if we had an MVP program, because I loved bleeding edge software. I love testing. I like finding bugs and fixing them, just making software better. A few years later, I've finally, put in the nomination form, and I got it. And I spoke that in. I was like, I'm going to do this. So never hold yourself back. If you have a thirst for something, take hold of that. And another example. So Live 360. This was the first big developer conference that I attended back in, I think it was 2012. And this was after many attempts to get a company to send us out for training, because I just wanted to go to Orlando. And I was so amazed by listening to and seeing a lot of the people that I looked up to face to face. I was in heaven. Like, this is what I want to do. I want to be on that stage. And then 2019, I made it happen. And this is one of my favorite photos. And this is what the shirt is all about, Abel. And the reason that I put this photo up is because Abel himself has been like a huge inspiration to me. I feel like he's the embodiment of speaking something into existence. He was a fighter, and in my eyes, he'll always be that inspiration. And that was like one of the best parts of my life so far, was being able to listen to him give a keynote, and for me to be inspired by his words. And so, like, I put this keynote in honor of him, just knowing that, like, I wish he were still here, but he lives on, because someone else inspiring me means that I can inspire someone else down the line and keep that inspiration growing. And with that said, the last thing I want to say is, don't accept defaults. That's what this shirt is. If something is against you, if if someone's telling you you can't do this, or it sounds impossible, don't accept that. If you know that you can do something to improve, if you know you can make everything the way you want it, do it. Just don't hold yourself back. Don't put yourself in a box. Leap forward into the type of person you want to be. And with that said, this is all I have for today. If there's any questions, I wouldn't mind answering any. But if you need to keep in touch with me, I am at Sinclairinator with a 0 on Twitter, and Snickler on GitHub.